And we're live. Welcome everybody to another NPM Open RFC call. Today's date is Wednesday, April 7th, 2021. We'll be following along in the agenda that was posted in issue 362 in the NPM RFC's repo. I will spam the meeting notes doc for folks. Feel free to add yourselves as attendees. And yeah, just a quick reminder and acknowledgement. These calls and all comms on the RFC's repo are governed under a code of conduct we ask you to abide by. The synopsis here is just be kind. If other folks are speaking, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. And yeah, hopefully we can have good discourse. Also, just quick announcements for ourselves. We are continuing to ship new releases weekly. So we cut a release last week. We are currently at 7.8 of the NPM CLI. So hope folks are staying up to date and giving us feedback. Any other announcements from folks? Things happening in the community? Nope. If not, then we can dive right into the agenda today. First RFC we've got is 356. The NPM audit fix provides overrides. Rebecca, I know you brought this up, and I think we had a good discussion internally about almost a month back now. Did you want to give maybe like a little bit of an overview of what this is?
Yeah, sure. So the brief overview here is, so we're getting overrides. We have the overrides RFC, which I gather it hasn't been officially accepted yet, but it's verging on that. And then work can happen on that. And overrides are something, this got into thinking about the problem of hot patches, basically. Like if you have a security problem where you need to provide a hot patch because the package isn't maintained anymore, or it's 5 major versions moved on and the next dot release was already released for the one that has a problem, and like you can't just easily do a new Symver compatible release to fix the problem. So probably more of a problem when the maintainer is just unavailable, which happens a lot with older modules. So how do you handle that? And overrides provide a way of doing that. And the idea here is that it would be really great if there was a way for audit to provide advice that would say, hey, you should go use an override to fix this problem, instead of doing a normal, normally the audit advice is, switch to this version if it's a minor bump, or here's a major bump and you'll have to figure that out on your own. With the override, we'd be saying, well, this is Symver incompatible, but we assure you that it will in fact work. So that's the idea. That's the
high level. Yeah,
the high level.
So yeah, the idea I think is that audit then would provide the overrides. Is that right?
Yeah, so the idea is twofold. One is that like this becomes a kind of advice that can show up in the audit report. And then the second part is that audit fix, when it sees this advice, can apply it to your package JSON. Right.
So it's like a resolver as well. Like there's like, yeah, 2 pieces. There's the advice, or like the overrides that we support. So is the intent also that how do we add these to, and I haven't done a good job at reviewing this, but how would we add the recommendations in that endpoint, or how do you create like
you'd have to look at the endpoint, and I haven't gone into that in the RFC yet, because I wanted to go and like play with it and see it, because I want to, because any addition to it needs to like still continue to function with the existing things. But you get back a list of actions to take, and each of the actions have a type associated with them for the kind of action it's taking. So we could introduce a new type as one possibility. So right now they're like, essentially it's, Symver minor, Symver major, and review, manual review. Those are the 3 types that are in use right now, to the best of my knowledge. And so this might involve introducing a 4th type.
Wes, did you want to?
Sure, yeah, no, so I think this is a great idea. I think one thing that's been really lacking is a good user experience around messaging this kind of stuff to end consumers, because they just don't understand it. And so anything we can do to make that better is absolutely great. I do worry, and this is my same worry about overrides. So I've noticed now, having looked at a ton of Yarn projects that use overrides, that they grow stale really fast. Like, you put them in for the quick fix because that's the whole point, right? You know, you need a quick fix, right? But like, nobody goes back and reviews them. I found projects at work that have had overrides in place for like 2 years or so. Well, whenever, I don't know actually how long it's existed in Yarn, but I remember seeing one commit that was over a year old that added an override, and it's like, that's locked back. And no matter what you're doing, because it's an override, it's a hard pin. You knock out your lock file thinking you're going to get updates, and you still don't, because you have an override in place, right? So the concern from a security standpoint, if we're adding this as a security feature, is that we're fixing the temporary without, and now ignoring it, or maybe not ignoring, but we might make the long-term security impact worse. So I just want to make sure we consider that if that's what we're going to move forward with. Related, and I just want to add this on because I think this is important. This problem is not just a security problem. Security is probably the most impactful part, but how you update dependencies is something that we have some pretty bad workflows around today in general. So if we can, I don't want to go like make the scope of this much larger because I think this is a good change just in general, assuming we land overrides soon, but like we should be considering the workflows around general dependency updates, because that actually avoids some of the security implications just from a foundational level, right? Like if you're staying up to date, you're naturally getting some of the security updates before they even get publicly released as a CVE. So it's not just about the security aspect. So if there's a way we could tie this sort of functionality into the general dependency update story, I think that would be good to consider as well.
I don't know who was first, Tierney.
Rebecca, you can go ahead and reply, I assume.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've got a direct response, which is, so Yarn's overrides, or I forget what they call them, resolutions, are not the same, work pretty differently than the way NPM and PNPM work. PNPM is almost, but not quite the same as NPM's. But the main difference here is that in Yarn, you give it a package name or a path to a package name in your dependency tree, and say anytime you see that package name or that deeper has this parent, replace it with this specific version. In PM, you're saying anytime you see this package name at this specifier, and so for these kinds of overrides, I would do it for the specific version that we're patching. And so that means if a parent module wants a more recent version than the one that you have an override for, the update will actually happen. It won't block the update from happening. Because it's only if something like if we are saying 3.1 is 3.1.0 has a security issue and it's fixed in this special hotfix, and somebody does an install that now asks for 3.5 of that package, they'll just get 3.5 of that package. So they don't get that like locking down of dependencies the way Yarn does. So that may resolve that concern. It's certainly possible to end up with overrides in your package JSON that don't do anything at all in your project. And so that's something else I think to consider, is like, how do we want to clean those up? Because I think that's a more likely outcome with NPM.
Tierney, did you have a response to that?
I have a separate topic, so if Wes wants to reply, go ahead.
That's what I raised my hand for. You're gonna see my daughter yelling chips over and over while I speak. Sorry. oh man, now I'm distracted and I can't remember what I was going to say. There was two things that I was going to mention. So I totally agree that the use case you mentioned greatly reduces the worry. Thank you. She loves chips and my lunch is sitting on my desk. What am I gonna do? So right, exactly. Who doesn't? So I agree. It greatly reduces it in that use case. I worry that people will be liberal with the way that they apply some of these, and so in theory, yes. In practice, it might end up being that somebody says, well, we just know that this is never going to get fixed in the 1.x branch. Let's just actually blanket say anything 1.x get upgrades to 2.x, and like that could be worrisome. I'm not trying to discount that like the responsible application of this feature, which is probably what we should design for, will be like you say, right? But then there's going to be a lot of people who just
that feels like a concern with overrides generally. And I agree, and I think it would be worth calling out in this that like audit providers should like the actual application of it should be very specific so that we don't run into that. But I think that's something worth calling out.
Wes, were you completed?
I had a second thing, but honestly, I don't know. She's loves those chips, so that's all I can think about now.
Toonie, did you?
If other people have replies to that, they can absolutely take precedence. I have a slightly different topic on, like I have a different topic on this subject or this RFC. So if other people have replies.
Okay, Jordan or Gar?
Gar should go first.
Okay.
I'm confused as the lines here because we're discussing overrides, not audit now. I don't know where the boundaries are here of this specific RFC and what we're discussing. So more of a point of order, like, all I've heard is discussion about overrides themselves, not what this audit would mean. So I'm confused and I don't have a lot of context. Help me.
Maybe my question sort of relates to that. Like, given that my understanding of this RFC is that for a specific vulnerability, that which already comes with a range of affected versions, that the vulnerability, the audit warning itself should be able to also provide, meaning the registry should also be able to also provide a suggestion to say, hey, client, if you apply this override, then even though it's not SEMVer compatible, it will still fix the vulnerability.
That's right.
And so my one question, which I may have missed because I joined late, is this supplied only by the registry and whoever's maintaining that vulnerability database, or like, does the author of the vulnerable package get to suggest these sorts of overrides?
This was specifically about modifying the audit, the way we handle audit endpoint data, not expanding where that kind of stuff can come from.
Okay, so only the registry owner, in other words, would decide that. Okay, so then the next question is there a reason that adding a new type makes sense to me here? Is there a reason that they should be able to provide a version range at all, or should it just only be allowed to apply to the affected version range that is already associated with the vulnerability? Because then that sort of avoids the risk that Wes was talking about, where it accidentally gets applied too broadly because someone's being lazy or something.
I mean, I would expect that the result that would put in your overrides would be for the specific version that it's fixing, although it could be for the range of versions that the vulnerability applies to. That would be a reasonable. Right. Both of those seem reasonable to me. But yeah, I agree. I don't think it should ever be a user provided range. Right.
Well, so I can see a use case for where the affected versions range is very large, and the versions that the override applies to is a subset of that. But I do not see any use case for where it is not actually a subset. Meaning, if we can constrict this type to only allow to override version or versions that is a subset of the affected version range, then would that mitigate Wes's concern and still allow granular targeting of a specific version? Or like if V1, V2, and V3 are all affected, like, but maybe you can only do the override for v3. Like you'd be able to do that because v3 is a subset of the affected versions. Just kind of throwing that out there.
I mean, that was my assumption as to how it would work. I agree.
So maybe it's a good if we add some like use cases like into the RFC. Like, yeah, I think that was something that
needs some examples.
Yeah, I think that would be perfect. And then I'm wondering also, like, is it just, and I know Tierney, you had your hand up there for a while, but just on this a little bit more, like, would it be like, should this be opt-in? Like, should this type be opt-in, like even further than fix, like npm audit fix flag, like include overrides, like, or I'm just wondering how we introduce this in a way that is like more,
I mean,
less magic and more. Yeah.
I mean, fix is pretty magic. I don't know. I don't really see a reason that we would want to make it like, if it's a safe update, and if we're providing a specific patch like this, it's going to be a very constrained set of versions, as Jordan pointed out, because you don't want to hand pat probably a specific version. In fact,
I'm just wondering if we roll it out at the same time as we roll out overrides, then, so that it's like essentially an improvement to npm audit fix, so that there's no like, we don't roll out overrides first and then this, because it seems like the two essentially go hand in hand, or like,
I mean, it's still going to, like, just because the npm client has the ability to consume these, it'll be a while before we have any audit advice that includes this. Like, this is separate from talking to the I don't actually know which team it is that handles that at this point, but the team that's producing this audit advice.
The other question I had that it kind of ties into this as well is like, and I think Jordan and Rebecca touched on this a bit, of like, is npm itself even going to be providing this? Like, because this, how do we distribute these things, which is a whole new registry thing? It seems like, maybe I'm wrong, maybe I don't understand something, but it seems like there's like some kind of new publishing that's required. No? Okay.
No, because npm supports aliases. So it can just say, use this completely different package, publish to the registry. I think I have an example of that, of that much at least in the RFC. Yeah.
So how does audit fix know which one of those to fetch?
It would be in the result that you get back from the audit API.
Cool.
It would tell you, use this.
Got you. That makes sense.
It would only be there if the people responsible for that feed wanted it to be.
Right. And so that's where the decoupling of like what we could potentially agree on and add to the CLI is a little bit different from getting then like our partners and team that support the registry today like to include, right? Okay. Jordan, Wes, I see you also have your hands up.
Yeah, so I had asked to try to avoid disrupting the meeting about it, but again, because I showed up late, I may have missed. Is there like a concrete use case that this would solve? Because I guess I can understand for a private registry where a company is able to make a lot of assumptions. Like, for example, a breaking change might actually just be dropping a platform they no longer support anyway. And so like, that makes perfect sense. But for the public registry, is there any, like, when would this be useful?
Specifically, I would say when you're floating if you need to float a patch to a package that maintainers are inaccessible, so you're not going to get a patched version of that. So it's not been uncommon for people to go fork those packages at that point and just add the security fix. And this gives an ability to consume that.
But then if npm, the public registry, decided to do that, that would be effectively blessing a fork.
Yeah.
Is that something npm wants to get in the business of?
Or at least for that patch. Now, I will say, like, my motivation for bringing this is private registries.
Sure.
So yeah.
And only useful for private registries doesn't mean it shouldn't be added, obviously, right? I just wanted to clarify.
Personally, I think that I can imagine, I guess it's kind of like, that seems like a question for the security team that's producing those.
I guess I'd also, I would definitely say that, like, even if this feature is only useful for private registries and npm like audit does nothing from like the npm registry, that's fine. Like I think that's a totally fine feature to ship.
Yeah, totally agree. The reason I'm asking is because I'm trying to think through unintended consequences. And if for sure it will never be used by the public registry, then like, cool, I don't care. But like there are no unintended consequences that matter. But if there is a future use that we haven't thought of, then I'd want to try to think through the implications of that. That's all.
This would be less blessing a fork and more blessing a single floating patch. But yeah, you're right. It's definitely like, it gets a little weird there to say you're using person A's package and now you're using person B's.
Yeah. Wes, you've had your hand up for a bit. Did you want to?
So I think I should just take it down. I think my question was answered.
Okay. Gar, and then
let me just respond to Tierney's question in chat, because I think that's valid. Is can this be published by module authors? I think that the feature here specifically would not be something that would involve the module author, because they would then just publish the fix. But I think that any data, and I think there's another RFC for this, that is anything around an audit result should be more owned by the module author than it is today. So if we're adding this and we expect the public registry to do it, there should definitely be some sort of integration with the module author to make sure, yeah, approved, or you know, whatever it is. Like maybe if Moment decided that they wanted to use this feature to shift everybody over to Luxon, like that should maybe be a fine thing, like, and say like, look, there's some security vulnerabilities in that, move over here, here's the override. Like, I don't know, maybe I'm taking a whole nother step that we don't want to.
Yeah.
Here,
Yeah.
I'm just
So
trying
I
to
just
think
want to
like ways that it needs should be owned by the people who own the package, and not necessarily by npm/github/ you know, whoever owns the registry.
You just mean public registry, because again, private registries can do what, like, should probably do whatever.
Yeah, I don't think we need a protocol for it in the private registry space. Just if npm is going to utilize this in the public registry, we need to make sure that module authors can have a say in what results are returned.
Sure. Gar, I'll give you a last or maybe second last word here on this, and if we can maybe time box this and move on, and feel free to, it sounds like next steps here is add some more use cases and like in the RFC itself, and we can keep it on the docket to talk next week.
And I think some details on the protocol itself.
Sure. Yeah, and we can tap our partners as well on the registry side. Feel free to go, Gar.
Okay, once again, I'm slowly catching up here. What we're proposing is a new thing the audit could return. The private registries can implement and the CLI will pick up on, but that we don't really think the public registry should even do at this point. And that's fine if it doesn't, because it's just something the CLI can handle, because we support many registries. That's what this recommendation is, that if npm audit sees this, the CLI should be able to gracefully handle it and act on it, right? Okay, thank you. Sorry, just making sure.
And this is depending on overrides, right? So like it's truly a feature on top of like, So we got to do that like soon. So
quick little addition. I think it should have the ability to write the override to the package JSON, and I don't think is that mentioned in the RFC? I didn't see it.
I mean, I think that's the only way to add overrides. So
I meant automatically, like not just like here's a recommendation that you should add the override. Here's the JSON printed on the CLI. I mean, literally write it on its own without.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's the intent. I'll make sure it's clear.
Awesome.
Another thing that might be nice is that the information written to package JSON contains some sort of annotation, like, for example, the URL to the vulnerability or something.
Yeah, I don't know how.
We're not using just, okay.
I have to refresh my memory on the overrides RFC to see if there's a place to put it. If there's not, then never mind. But
there might be a log that we could create. There might be some sort, like we've started to do that more. And like with npmy and explain, it's like now like we want more information.
Well, it could even be stored in the hidden lock file.
Sure.
Actually, though, an
We-
improvement to overrides would be just to store it in the package JSON, because again, my whole concern about them going stale is a human problem, and the only way to make sure the humans see it is put it right next to the thing. So if we could add to that to make it more usable for other use cases like this, I think that would be a great solution.
Yeah, it's just how in JSON, like comments in JSON. So I just wanted to be mindful of time here because we do have a number of other topics I want to get to today. This is great though, Rebecca. I appreciate you bringing this up, and hopefully we can move on it quickly. And feel free, folks, to add comments in the RFC itself, and hopefully we'll get it updated a bit and talk about it next week as well if you're around. Moving on to adding type to npm init. Miles wasn't able to join today. This is our RFC, so essentially the topic 347. We've talked about improvements to npm init quite a bit over the last, I think, year or so. And Jordan, I see you have your hand up. Did you want to?
I'm just preparing for when you're finished. I have some comments.
Okay. So I think at the high level, this was a small improvement. It's not completely, I think, refactoring npm init itself, even though we've talked about that and how we could potentially consume the work that the PKG JS folks are doing with the create project, and essentially, managing your package JSON, and creating templates and that kind of work that I know that we've put into that working group. Did you want to top up here, Jordan? Like, do you have thoughts, feelings about adding this as a question as you're going through npm init
Yeah, I think it's a very, very bad idea, and I have two major reasons why. So the history here is that when the modules working group intended this to eventually go into npm init, right? Like that was the original thinking is, oh, this would be great, we'll put it in there. There's two reasons why I don't think we should do it. One is a timing thing. The tooling in the ecosystem are not ready for it. There's a bunch of things like ESLint and Babel and TypeScript and so on that ask you to put, maybe not TypeScript, ask you to put config in a .js file. And if you put type module, they break because they require a synchronous CJS file. And it is not very clear to users that they can fix it. They can maybe fix it by renaming the file to .cjs, but only if the tool supports that, which many don't, or removing type module. And so and then there's just a bunch of tools that like around resolution that don't handle it appropriately yet. Native ESM or the exports field or .js files as ES modules. So I just think it's going to be a long time before the ecosystem is ready, I think, for wider adoption of native ES modules at all, let alone type module. The second concern is I think this was a very poorly designed package JSON field. It turns out, I think, that this was a very poorly designed package JSON field. It's confusing. It implies that if type module implies to people, and I'm not saying it doesn't apply this to me, but objectively, people have told me this is what they think it means when I help people in IRC and Slack and so on constantly. It implies that in order to use ES modules, the package has to have type module. That's false. Type common JS implies to them that it can't have ES modules. That is false. The only thing it means is .js is parsed as an ES module instead of as a common JS module, and that is it. But the naming of it is very confusing. It does not imply that. And many tutorials and documentation now naively recommend people use type module, and then they show up in all of the help forums that I moderate and are hugely confused why all their stuff doesn't work. And the two solutions for them are either hope that all their tools support it, which they don't, and then teach them all the implications and what that means, such as people using require won't be able to require your .js files unless you also add the exports field. Oh, and here's how the exports field works. And even if all the tooling supported it, which it does not, like it's a very long and complex thing to teach. Or remove type module and all the problems are solved and then they happily get back to work. So like I'm fine. I don't care if npm init silently adds type common JS because that's already the default. I think that's fine. But I think asking the question is harmful because I don't think it's possible to ask the question in a way that won't confuse people. and get them to answer the actual wrong answer based on what they think it means. And I think type module inherently is harmful, at the very least until the whole ecosystem is caught up, but inherently because I think it's poorly named.
That's very well worded. No, it's good like synopsis. I don't know who was first. Wes, feel free to go.
Okay. I was going to, yeah, well, I have nothing to say. That's excellent. And I think that just decides the issue right there for me, at least. That said, I think Rick and I have a meeting scheduled later this week to do a once over on the PKG.js stuff. And that does ask whether or not you want CommonJS or module. I think it would be a great place to sort of pilot this. And you know, I think I'm using those tools. I use them instead of npm init. Whether or not we're ready to start recommending them for a wider audience, you know, I think is sort of still up for question. They may not solve everybody's problems. Either way, I think that's a great place to try out something like this as we move forward, since it has much lower usage and lower impact right now. And it would be just a really great way for us to get feedback. So happy to like spend some time going through what the next steps are with more than just Rick, who I'm chatting with later this week, on that, if we think that's a good way to go forward with this particular RFC.
Right.
Yeah, I think people opting into a tool like a special init thing or whatever is totally fine. Like I think because that that provides ample opportunity to investigate whether the things I'm claiming are true, to figure out if there's alternative ways to educate people and solve those problems and so on. I'm just very, very concerned about making it be an implicit default.
Gar, did you want to go and then Bradley?
Yeah, let me clear my hand. npm init can run, like create React app, right? This is something, if I want it, I can make it. And I'm a big fan of letting the community make these, right? I don't think npm should be doing, npm init /y should be the bare bones. Maybe we throw CommonJS in there. I don't even think that's a good idea. If I want a create CommonJS, I can make that, right? And if it's good, the community will use it, right? And that'll become how you create a CommonJS app. Am I wrong?
No, I think that's the synopsis of like what we've pulled out with the create project as well. Yeah, so Wes is clapping. Yeah. So
like npm init should never get anything new. The community should decide what that needs to do. And things create like create React app. That's a hard word to say. There are things that will bubble up as the canonical way that the community has chosen to create a CommonJS app or etc.
Yeah, if we're less opinionated, I think it's good.
Do you know what's easier to say? npm init pkg. So, yeah.
Yeah, we got that namespace, which is great. So create -pkg is the package right now that they're working on. Bradley, you have your hand up. Did you want to add something?
Yeah, I just joined because I mostly just watch usually. So somewhat to agree with Jordan, changing the default is really bad in the ecosystem. People do this. Node's test suite can't even run if you do this. There was a PR to try to change the default as a build option in Node. Almost no code base we found ran if we changed the default. So just a heads up, if you do change the default, please go make sure you have a large number of code bases you test against to make sure it doesn't break. Also, TypeScript doesn't actually have a plan for their real ESM migration yet. So you should consult with them because there are some problems with them adopting type module, even though it is the best option currently for them. So yeah, that's it.
Cool. Anybody else had any other comments they want to make on this? If not, we can move on to
actually one maybe point of order then. Just to prevent, if we think that, like Gar said, future changes to npm init should be made in this alternate world that we're creating for it. We should make that clear somewhere. Maybe that's a documentation. Yep. Maybe that's, I don't know what it is, but we should definitely make it clear that like npm init should not receive new RFCs, new PRs. The intent is that it remains stable and static, and any innovation happens in this other place.
Yep. I think that's a good takeaway for us to go and document that. And yeah, excited to see the work that Rick and yourself, Wes, come up with create PKG work. So, okay, if we can, we'll move along to PR 2912. So this is find dupes pretty print. I think this was added. Roy, you want to track this at some point. I will link this PR. I think this got added a couple weeks back. I'm not sure if you can provide some context on it. This is like improvements made to find dupes. Do you remember why you threw this on the agenda?
Why was it? I think it's proposing to change the output for npm find dupes. Yeah, I don't remember, Darcy. You got me completely off guard.
I got to give you more time to prep for the call. Yeah, so this is changing the output, and you know, we can clean this up. Obviously, the idea, I think we might have talked about this a couple weeks back as well, about just cleaning up the style of this to be more in line with like outdated, you know, nicer columns, etc. But I don't know exactly why we were putting this on the agenda. So yeah, calling you out. We can skip over it if we think it's just a something that we'll review and see if we think is useful for folks. I'll remove the label.
Sounds good. Yeah.
Okay. So moving on then, RFC 343. By yourself, Roy, if you want to provide some context into the switching. We talked a little bit about this when you were away 2 weeks back, about the switching the context for workspaces. So right now, the approach we have for making, and I'll, I guess, lead you into this, but the approach that we have for making subcommands workspace aware is to sort of take the approach that we are jumping into almost as if you would CD and then run the npm command in that workspace directory. And so the idea, I think, with this RFC, and you can correct me, Roy, is that to make things more consistent for the end users, if you are running an npm command within a workspace already, you've CD'd yourself into that folder and you run the command, should that be consistent and essentially run the exact same way as if you had done that command in the root? Is that a good, is that
accurate? Yes, that's a great description. Yeah, and I did watch the previous RFC meeting where Jordan made a bunch of comments, and I think it's all very pertinent. Thank you all for discussing that last time. So yeah, and I think I had one more concern to bring up that I don't think was mentioned the last time, which is basically the current workflows, because today there is also like other tools around workspaces like Lerna, all these that might be taking into account the fact that the npm client is not smart enough about that right now, right? Like it's not doing this auto switch, the prefixes behind the scenes. So yeah, I think that's another thing to take into consideration. And I think the solution proposed by Jordan might solve it in a neat way, but I do have a reservation about the solution, because the idea of having the npm RFCs files within a workspace and have the client read that to look up for a workspace root or whatever other config to let you know that this should then behave with the auto switch that we want to provide here. Yes, it makes it safer, but at the same time, like it seems a lot of extra work, right? And on top of that, we are not reading the the CLI currently does not read those extra npm-rc files within the workspaces. So I'm kind of
there's
over
use
the fence,
cases for that, right? Like I could have a monorepo where I have one public package that's published publicly and only has public dependencies, and thus I want it to only fetch from the public registry. And then I have another package that's published to my internal registry, and I can do that with publish config in its package JSON, but it installs dependencies for my internal registry, and I want that one's registry setting to be the internal registry. The only way I can do that is with project-specific npm-rc files. So I kind of feel like we have to have that feature anyway. And if we assume that feature already exists, is it that much work to add the root prefix?
No, yeah, then it becomes fairly trivial.
This is a road. This is a long road if we go down this road, and I'm not sure we want to reach the end of it. It's going to be really complicated. It's going to add a ton of debugging steps to people trying to figure out why their CLI is not doing what they thought it was supposed to do. Like thinking about like the works on my machine issues related here, right? It's going to be like, what directory did you run that command in when we're trying to help people debug? And that's going to be really confusing. So I raised my hand. What was that?
Do you not already need to know that? Because any relative path and implicit config everywhere depends on the C word. So like you have to know that. The current working directory or whatever.
Okay, but it's going to be okay. The difference is that it's going to be a combination of the configurations from the current directory to the root.
Just like ESLint, Babel, TypeScript.
I know other things, but they're also incredibly difficult to debug because of that. Like I have actually debugged this specific problem multiple times at work when people come in for support channels saying like, hey, my ESLint is behaving weird and it's failing CI, and it's like they added the root key in the wrong RC file or something, right? Like there's like weird stuff that happens as soon as you add that complexity that we sort of avoid today by having just the one, right? Like, and I think there's a lot of value there. The reason I raised my hand was specifically to bring up that issue, which I got really on board with that idea in the last call. I was like, yeah, this sounds great. This actually solves it really well, but it solves this problem well, but it makes other problems, I think, significantly worse. And that is my biggest concern. So an example that I was thinking of that I was going to share is, say you have a registry config for install in a child RC, npm RC. Well, how does the workspace work now, right? Because now things that came from that child package should come all from one other registry, but the root doesn't have that registry. So now you have to like mesh these two configs together and say, well, if I'm getting for this workspace child project, I still don't think we've established correct terminology for what the workspace root is and what, but anyway, this child package of the workspace, I apply this config, but these other ones I apply differently. And I think that's a nightmare in the long run. And if we can avoid it, and if the only reason we're adding it is this one feature, I think we should look at other ways to just avoid that problem.
Well, so the solution there is the registry specifier that was already added. When you pull a dependency, you grab its registry setting and you just mesh it together, and then it just follows from there. But I hear that it adds some complexity. I think the principle that I'm coming from is, generally speaking, inside when I'm CD'd inside a child project, any command I run should be identical as if I run the workspace version of that command from the root that points at that child. And that like just straight up requires that npm-rc works the same way. And I have expectations for that for package bumping. All of my packages use auto versioning things. And so I set like allow same tag, and the prefix for the version is V, and the message and things like that. I put that in npm-rc. So if I wanted to move any of my packages inside an npm workspace right now, I couldn't, because those like, unless I wanted to hoist those settings to the top and not be able to differentiate them by project. So I agree with you that if this is the only reason to add that complexity, then maybe it's not worth it. But I don't think it's the only reason. I think it's, I would politely say that it's a bug that it's not already supported. And if we fix that bug and it's already supported, then we don't have to go with the root prefix solution. I'm actually not super attached to it. It was just what I came up with spitballing last week, right? But like whatever solution we come up with, I think should just assume that npm-rc files work there, because that's how npm works. Like already, if I have an npm-rc in 30 nested folders and I have 30 of those files, they're already merged together. Like, so it seems weird that the only place that doesn't apply is a workspace child. Like it never just looks at one npm-rc file. It always finds every npm-rc all the way. No, am I wrong about that? I see Rebecca shaking her head.
I've never actually, I'm not entirely sure I've ever tried that, okay. But I assumed it didn't work that way because I have sometimes put an npm-rc. So actually, no.
Yeah, if I'm wrong about that, then I withdraw that reason to justify the feature, and that's fine. But people have put user level npm-rcs and it's messed with their projects, and I didn't realize that even creating an empty npm-rc might fix that.
Yeah, so, user level. I know I have a directory that is __ test, and I put all my like temporary like random little tests in it, and the root of it has an npm-rc, and I am able to override it in child ones. I am almost 100%.
Okay. I think I just got confused with the way ESLint RCs work, so I apologize for that.
Yeah. Rebecca, I see you have your hand up, and then Wes, if you want to rebuttal.
Yeah, I was just going to clarify that, which is, so what npm does is it looks for the root of the current npm project. And so it has a heuristic for that. And so it's looking for node modules or a package JSON. I think those are the only two things. And so it just scans up the directories until it finds one of those, and then does an install there. And says, this is my root, and then it goes to read the npm-rc from there. But I will say that with existing, like it's not a hard and fast thing that npm has to copy, but this is, of course, ultimately how other workspace implementations end up working, because they didn't have any opportunity for special, npm-rc reading. So, if you're already using workspaces from some other tool, you would expect it to work this way.
So on that point, I actually have a question then, just because I don't actually know. So in Yarn, if I have a Yarn workspaces project, which they do support, and PNPM supports like npm-rc files, those are respected and those are like munched together properly in a workspace if you're running.
To the best of my knowledge, they're not munched together. It's replacement.
Replacement, okay.
But I'd have to verify that. I can't speak definitively to that. Lerna, okay, of course, not being package manager specific, ends up just doing the, it literally runs in the npm command from the subdirectory and follows npm semantics.
Okay. So in terms of this RFC, then I'm wondering what we should, what's an actionable next step here? I feel like, Roy, we would have to update this to include maybe Jordan's recommendations if we want to go that route, or we back out and just say this isn't supported for now. Yeah, I
think we can just leave it there for a while, gather more feedback. But I think, well, yeah, we can collect more feedback. I can update the RFC to reflect this last round of discussion. But I think we should definitely leave it there for a while, and we can talk about more.
Can you also maybe provide more use cases or more examples of just the expectations? I
don't remember what is there currently. But I think the install is the ultimate example, right? Users expect they can just cd into a workspace, and let's say I want to add a new dependency here.
And should create a lock file in that directory. Exactly, yeah.
Just trashes your, so it should just make that auto switch, especially in the install scenarios where the user just wants to add a dependency there. So I can definitely add more examples and add a little bit more of the feedback from these discussions. It was pretty much bare bones when I first opened it. It was just to get the conversation started.
Yeah. Before we switch topics, did you want to
just so understand the scope of this? We're talking about the thing we said where NPM tries to find the root, right? It goes up until it sees a node modules or package JSON. We're adding to this, or if one up, I can find myself in a workspace, right?
Not necessarily one up, it can be many.
Yeah, not necessarily one up.
Okay.
And also like you can have multiple, you can have a workspace that has like 6 different folders. You can have like different structures for any arbitrary child project, depending on how you've configured it.
That's a tall order.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think, yeah, a little bit different than the idea there for the config file. I think it would look specifically for package JSON with the workspaces declaration on it. So we would basically use the config we have today for workspace to detect that is actually a child of a thing declared.
Well, I think regardless of the mechanism, it seems like there's 2 properties here that I think are somewhat conflicting, but that are both valuable to have. One is I want my child project to behave as if it wasn't inside a workspace. Just like, meaning it's the same, meaning if I move it out of a workspace and I move it into a workspace, nothing changes as long as I'm CD'd into the directory and I run the same commands. That is how I prefer to do it. But I also see the value of the other viewpoint, which is I want my child project to know it's part of a workspace so that it always, when I run a command inside it, it always does the workspace appropriate thing. And you know, I am willing to accept that the one I want isn't the one most people want, and that's fine. But I think that they're both valid, right? So I don't actually care what the default is. I just think they should both be possible. And it seems nice to me to explicitly have a way for a child project to either say, I want to be independent, or I'm pointing to my workspace root. And that could live in package JSON, that could live in npm-rc, doesn't matter. But like whatever would make sense. But if, as long as there's an explicit way to do that, then with either default, npm workspace init can stamp it in there. And with and someone who wants to do it differently can alter that. And then like we've provided both use cases in a sort of clean and explicit way. And you know, there's more complexity to debug for Wes's case, but like at least it's an explicit thing that can be like known to look for.
Yeah. Tierney, to do.
Is there any prior art on doing that in the other workspace implementations?
I don't think so, but my assertion from many other workspace discussions on this RFC call is that there does not exist another workspace implementation that does anything correctly, because hoist and no haste is like inherently flawed. Like, I mean, I'm not like judging them for it. I'm just saying, like, I think people picked that direction and ran with it. And I think that it just turns out in practice to inherently be the wrong model for workspaces. And so as a result, I think that it's useful to look for prior art, but we should in general try to figure out what would actually be the best model.
Right. And I guess my question there wasn't trying to gate what your suggestion is. It was trying to see, is there something we can look at where someone did it right? So if there's a prior
I mean,
art,
there may be, I'm not aware of one.
Yeah, I do think that Yarn has the ability for you to map back to the workspace. So that's the only like similar kind of mechanism I believe that exists today. But yeah, Roy, I see you have your hand.
Yeah, no, I was precisely going for no hoist as an example, but even though let's not judge the merit of the good or bad solution, but it is just a way. So basically we can detach this proposal from the npm-rc idea, at least, so that at least we can move them in parallel. And so because the no hoist configuration in itself like is an example of being able to define a property right within a child workspace and just have that be part of the logic there for the client. So maybe we can propose having a nested property. It can be root inside a workspace is of a child workspace. So as a replacement for the npm-rc config value you propose there, Jordan. So maybe I can define both of them in the RFC as alternatives, and we can move on from there in the next conversations.
Yep. just to be mindful of time. So the action here, Roy, you're going to provide both those options essentially in this RFC, or at least document them. And then we can at least discuss the merit of both and keep this open for now. And just, again, be mindful of time. We had a number of other issues I know that we want to get to, but I know Isaac and Nilf, who I think own a bunch of these, aren't here this week. And then the other item on here, 1A2, RFC 1A2, for audit licenses. I know Tierney, we've gone back and forth a little bit about this is something we want to do. We can move, I think, forward with it async probably and flush things out.
Yep.
And then the other item we weren't able to get to today is sort of the optional install agenda item that I had here. The only reason why I added that was just to basically say that, you know, this seems like something that can be done now based on the filtered install support that we've provided with workspaces. So you could potentially, you know, put different dependencies in workspaces and optionally install them that way if you want to get that kind of feature. Wes, I see your hands up. I'll give you a couple seconds.
Yeah, it was really quick. We have circled around this on every call for the past like 3 months. I think we need a deep dive on the next steps for workspaces. Every issue we come up with, which is like, let's do an improvement or let's add a feature or whatever, it's like, yeah, but foundationally workspaces need improvement. So like, why are we continuing to circle around this and spending time when we should probably just set aside some time, figure out some sort of plan, even if it's not like an RFC that's going to be implemented just now. It would just save us from like rehashing that conversation over and over and over again like we have been.
Let me propose like the agenda for what that would look like in a separate issue, and we can queue that up. Roy, did you have a rebuttal before we close out?
It is just that we scheduled that conversation, but it's probably going to be an NPM 8 kind of thing, because we have, so for the sake of NPM 7, we're shipping the commands, we're making it so that they're actually usable, right, for the community. So we still have to just figure out this remaining, really, because these are fundamental things we want to figure out for NPM 7, but then we want to have the conversation on how it's going to look like moving forward.
Fully in support of that. I didn't mean to disrupt that. I just hate that we have circled around this issue on the RFC call specifically. So if we can come up with a really good plan on a deep dive and only take your time, your folks' time for like an hour or two or something, and like really figure out like what we think would be the list of requirements, and then we table that until NPM 8 is, you know, under development, that's perfectly fine by me. I just don't want to have, we've spent a lot of time on these calls over the past 2 months circling around this, like, but workspaces as defined before in prior art are broken. Let's fix them. And like that, it just seems like it'll save us a lot of time in these other topics if we, for NPM 7 specifically, if we can have a plan for 8, and we can always then just like take a thing that we discuss here and table it to that 8 discussion, which will be just a lot easier to manage the discussion, I think.
Yeah, I think it's going to be just a lot of defaults changing, by the way. We'll see.
For NPM 7? Or do you mean 8? I'm confused.
Wow. Okay. Shots fired. Okay. Apologize. We're a couple of minutes over. Appreciate everybody jumping on again today, and hopefully feel free to continue to give feedback and keep conversation going in the RFCs themselves. And we'll be back ideally next week, same time, same place. So thanks everybody for joining today. Cheers.
Bye.